Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We're going to do the second part of the Maamar of Basi Legani, Tafshin Mem Hey, 1985, 40 years ago. As we mentioned at the first part, this is the second time that we're learning it for the second time. And as mentioned, there are several shiurim of this Maamar, several choices, but in our series we're going to go through this. For the first half, see last week's Shira. That also included in it an introduction and a bit of the history of Yahrtzeit, the auspicious day when the Rebbe began his leadership on upon the passing of his Rebbe and father-in-law, the previous Rebbe. And I'd like to just do a quick correction. An astute listener pointed out that we mentioned that the 10th of Shevat is the Yahrtzeit of the previous Rebbe's grandmother, the Rebbetzin of the Rebbe Maharash, the fifth Rebbe, Rebbetzin Rivka. And for that occasion, he had given the Maamar out originally. And in the class, in the Shira, we said that it was in 1915 Tafrei Shayin Hey. It's really a year earlier. That was her first Yahrtzeit, but she passed away in 1914 Tafrei Shayin Dalet. So thank you, CSB, for pointing that out. And again, if anyone has any orders or any corrections, we're always happy to receive those. Now, this one more way of introduction here, because we're going to the second part of this Maamar, and the third part is quite complex, and it addresses very fundamental aspects of godliness and creation. And really, these are concepts and subjects that should be delved into at great depth and length. And the way our classes are set up, that doesn't lend itself to proper going into depth about all these things. But we'll try to just at least mention the basic part of these concepts. These are things that have to be thought about a lot. And just by one more point of introduction is that the Rebbe himself explained some of these concepts in four subsequent farbrengens, both in a Maamar, and two more Maamorim, and some Siches. And in one of those talks, the Rebbe said that, indeed, usually we don't talk and delve into some of these great, complex Kabbalistic topics because they're beyond some of our, certainly beyond our proper and complete understanding, because God created us as finite thinkers, and God is the infinite. But nevertheless, we'll get into it. So, in the first part of the Maamar, we spoke about the general sense of making this world into God's garden, God's place of pleasure, by performing the mitzvahs, bringing back the Shira to the earth. This was done primarily in the Beis HaMikdash, and now we're working towards bringing the third Beis HaMikdash, the third temple, through our performance of mitzvahs and Torah study, etc., and especially in the times of the heels before Mashiach comes. And this is done by the legions of God who are given the gift, as it says in previous chapters of the Basi Legani, the treasure, which is also the idea of fear of heaven, which we have, and the awe of heaven, and our participation with the plan of God. We're up to Ois Gimel in the new, for those following inside, in the newer Hanocha, the newer way it was published. Maybe So the Rebbe says that to explain what this treasure is in the supernal realms, the previous Rebbe brings in the subsequent part of the Maamar in chapter 15, which he'll mention in a moment. As Divrei Tikunei Zohar, the words of the Zohar. And this is a concept and a description of God. The infinite light of God, meaning God's energy and presence, goes supernally, without any end, without any limit, and it descends till there's the lowest of the low. So there's no real goal. So when he says it goes to the lowest, anything the lowest that you could think of, God is there also. God is not void of any place. There's no place void of God. God is part of everything. Even in the lowliest place, even in the worst place, even in the most decrepit, God is there and can be revealed there. Sometimes the way we reveal God in such a place is by negating it, by abstaining. But God is there. Now, in chapter 15, which is the chapter which is pertinent to this year, like we explained, that the original Maamar had 20 chapters, and every year the Rebbe expounded on another chapter. So this year we're studying chapter 15. After we studied the 20 chapters of the continuum of this discourse, in the first 20 years subsequent to the passing of the Rebbe's Rebbe, the previous Rebbe. So the significance of 20 years that Rebbe brings here now, a nuance from the Talmud. If one is orphaned and their father left them real estate, as a protection, the Torah does not allow them to sell real estate until they turn 20, because we say that they don't understand the value of it properly and they could get ripped off. They have to have what's called an apotropos, somebody who's a guardian for them. And for that matter, the Rebbe doesn't mention it here, but the Torah also has the maturity level of a 20-year-old. From 20 and on, a person, if heaven forbid, they do something of capital punishment, they're able to get it, whereas till 20, one wouldn't get capital punishment in the Torah. So, but the Rebbe, of course, brings the one that shows the maturity in a positive sense, that then he's able to sell and do business with his father's real estate, which he inherited. Then we learn the discourse a second time, which when it's a double, it's a second time that has even more energy, like it says in Job. Second time doubles, more strength. And this year, meaning in 1985 in Tavshim Mem Hey, it's the second time we're learning chapter 15. That's why I said before that now, this year, Tavshin Pei Hey, 1985, it's the second time that we're doing it the second time. So it's double. So he starts to explain, what does it mean that God is infinitely, without any limit, let's say northbound, supernally. And that's the treasure of above. The previous Rebbe explains. Just like the infinite light of God and the energies everywhere in the lowest realm, wherever it may be, and it may be there in force and in a revealed sense, without any limit whatsoever and without any number, wherever it is and whatever it is, God is there, without any limitation whatsoever. Kefishin is by Rebbe, as it has been explained in the previous chapters. Similarly, the infinite light and energy of God, it goes up supernally till without any limit. So it means it never ends. It goes infinitely higher. Now, this is a very tough concept to understand. And when the Rebbe said it at the time, they studied this very deeply. People wrote about it, and this is the concept that we're going to discuss here. So, to say that it goes infinitely higher and higher and higher, what does that mean? Does it get greater? Where does it go? What is it? There's a certain point where creation started, where the physical world begins, then there's the way God is higher than creation, and then God should be it should just be the way He is in His essence. So what do you mean He goes higher and higher if He's just one thing in His essence of whatever God is? So how is that infinite higher than that? So it's the part that we can't relate to, and the way that we can't relate to it, it means it's hidden, and it's hidden, more hidden, and more hidden, and more hidden, going infinitely above. So that it's a very tough concept to understand. But the concealment of God, as high as you can get, He's more concealed and more concealed and more concealed, because you're going higher and higher and higher. Because picture us that we're the lowest of the realm in the chain of creation, which the Rebbe will discuss later, the idea of chain of creation. But in terms of going infinitely above, it's not a question of a revelation, but it's concealment, that it gets more and more concealed. It's deeper and deeper and deeper within Himself, deeper and more essential and stronger. So that's what it's called, Helam Achar Helam. But in a general sense, this is the whole idea of the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum is the contraction. And the Rebbe will explain it here, so we'll delve into it a little bit more shortly. But the idea of the contraction, that in order for there to be a world, God had to change, so to speak, from His essence, which was the only existence, higher than creation, before creation, and without any existence other than Himself. And in order for there to be creation and an existence, that had to be, so to speak, set aside. There had to be place made, room for existence that is, even though it's existence that God creates, and therefore it is godly, but it's already not the essence of God. And therefore, the Kabbalah explains that God had to make this contraction, this constriction, and this hyper-focus. And we also say he sort of pushed to the side, to the extent that the Kabbalistic works, which the Rebbe quotes, talk about it being in terms of a circle, and there's a dot in the middle of the circle, and that for creation that has to be pushed aside, and room has to be made. There's a concept that it's a circle, not a square, because from the middle of a dot, it's equal, the distance to every part in the circle, whereas in a square, it's actually every spot is a little bit different in terms of its distance. Okay, maybe there's 4 spots that are the same. We're not going to get into this, the whole concept here. But the idea that there had to be space. God filled all space, but there was no space. But that was the only existence that there was. It was pristine, just godliness. And that's it. And then God had to make, and this is how the Kabbalah explains it, push it aside, so to speak, to allow something else to happen. So let's see what the Rebbe says. Dalet, שהצמצום הראשון הוא הצמצום באור אין סוף, שההיה ממלא כל המציאות ולהיה מקום להעמיד הסלם is. So even though in the Luriana Kabbalah, the Yahrtzeit, we learned that the first contraction, the first tzimtzum, let's use the word tzimtzum now, because tzimtzum has concentration, contraction, constriction, all these things together, is a tzimtzum in the Or Ein Sof, in the infinite light that there was, which was filling any existence, anything that there was. That's all there was. There was no place for worlds, because all that there was God. And now the Rebbe explains another concept, which is the central part of this part of the Maamar, which is, as the Rebbe says right here, Mikol Mokem Isa B'Kabbalah V'Hu B'Chassidus Pa'om Nediris Shegam Lifnei HaTzimtzum HaRishon Hoya Inyan Shel Tzimtzum. Nevertheless, we learn in Kabbalah, and it's quoted in Chassidus, only a select few times, not many times, but it's brought in a few places that before this first tzimtzum, there was already a measure of a tzimtzum. So before we delve into how the Rebbe says, so if God were, so to speak, to making a decision that he wanted to create a world, so that's already before the mere fact that he wants to do something before he came up with the method of how he's going to do it is already a tzimtzum, which is higher than the tzimtzum that's going to have to be used to create the world. And then the mere fact that, let's say, God is thinking about something is also a tzimtzum, etc. So, v'yuvan ze'al piyeh yudua, we'll understand this according to a concept that we know Kabbalistically. Lekach she'oir hu be'ein aroich legabe hamoir. So we talk about the source of the light, the luminary, and the light itself. And they're relative to each other. They're really light dissipates as it goes further from the luminary. Today for the last many years, you can measure the amount of what's called lumens, right? The amount of light. So within the luminary itself, there's so much more than the light which is around. Which means also that whatever light is going to be used in creation is so much further removed, not even relative to the light that is in the essence of the pristine God in his essence. But within the light itself, as it spreads forth to become the idea of lumens and light, it's again not even relative the way it was when it was this same light as it travels was much lighter itself when it was within its source. As it is explained in Tanya. From this we know that even the light that's before God made the constriction, the contraction, the tzimtzum, there it's a certain element of revelation because it exists, it's an existence. That means it's revealed even at that level. The concept of the existence of light, the fact that it's in that sense. And we use light, of course, as an analogy, but that aspect of godliness. Now, once we're talking about that light, that's a light that we, when we talk about it, we talk about it from our perspective. We're already within the chain of creation. So, we say the highest level that we can talk about is the light, the infinite light. But that's already a light that's in relation to us, that we were created, to the world that was created. But in the pristine sense, it's not there yet. So, therefore the mere fact that there's light means that it's connected to worlds, even though it's before the tzimtzum, so to speak. And as we understand from the Eitz Chaim, previously quoted, when the infinite light was filling the place which is called the cholol. The cholol usually means space or a hole. In modern Hebrew, we call space, like outer space, also cholol, because it's the vast open, there's nothing there. So what was filling that spot? That was the infinite light. But the spot wasn't a spot yet, because it wasn't creation yet. So, and therefore there wasn't possible for there to be the existence of any worlds. That would illustrate and show that the revelation of the infinite light at that point is connected to the world only by negating, by not allowing worlds to happen, because that's the only thing that was there and it was filling, and there was no room for the world. So it is connected because it's filling, it's not letting the world in, but it's there as we relate to it. So now the way it's drawn down from this all-inclusive light, this light of the pristine part of God, when he decides to create, this comes down through what we call the tzimtzum. And with this we can understand what the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe, in his book called the Sefer HaMitzvos, we also know this book as Derech Mitzvosecha. Be'inyan habechina sheba hoya hatzimtzum. Regarding this idea that how this tzimtzum worked. Now this is a very interesting quote. And the quote that Yahrtzeit writes, "V'ro isik savyat kedesh mimerenu Rabbeinu hagodol, Adoni ovi zikni mereveraben shposeiden." I saw in the holy handwriting from our great teacher and master, my master and grandfather, my teacher and master, meaning this is all a reference, of course, to the Alter Rebbe, his grandfather, Rabbi Shneur Zalman. Shekina lebechina zu b'shem yecheles. He called this level with the word yecheles. Yecheles means ability, potential. So this level means it's in relation to something that can happen, and because something will happen or can happen or wants to happen, so it's referred to as yecheles. The potential that God can do anything. In other words, He may have not done anything, but He can do anything. So this level is called yecheles. Now, we learned elsewhere in Chassidus that the tzimtzum was in the light that was able to be revealed. That was going to be used for creation. That can be revealed. Like the Tzemach himself brings in that discourse. Where was this contraction? In this part of the light that was filling space that had to be moved so that creation could happen. So that means not in the pristine part of the light, but where it was already spreading, where there's already a decision for creation to happen. And then this is part of the methodology of the creation. So now how could this be called ability? This is already light. This is already part of the process. So how does that work out that this adjective is used to call this level where the contraction was yecheles, ability or potential? Well, pianal yesh leimar. Here's where the Rebbe puts in his explanation and how the Rebbe explains it. And this is the chiddush of the Maamar, the Navalei of this Maamar, where this is the beginning of it. Well, pianal yesh leimar. Like Menachem says, this is what you can take to the bank. That he's referring to this idea that we spoke about, that there had to be a contraction and a constriction and a concentration, a tzimtzum, before the first tzimtzum. The mere fact that there's going to be now a process of creation. The whole idea that there's a tzimtzum within this all-inclusive light. In other words, and this, by the way, goes up infinitely. And infinitely there has to be tzimtzumim in order for there to be creation. And this is why it's called helam, this part that we talked about earlier. So these are tough concepts, and we don't always talk about this, but if we think about it more, and when it gets too awesome, don't worry about it. We still got to just do what we got to do, as the Rebbe will say later on. So, the now through at that point, that's where the light was drawn down, and the revelation of this light, even the light that's before the tzimtzum, before the famous tzimtzum, there's already the tzimtzum with this light already emanating. And therefore there it's only called ability, because it's just part of the methodology before the creation really happens with the real tzimtzum. The lumens, the light, the way it's included in the source of the light, in the luminary, like we spoke about as the analogy, the supernal analogy of God. There, at that point, it because God, in his most pristine sense, is unlimited, therefore there is ability, but that's all it is, because he hasn't created with it yet. Because he has chosen not to create yet. But this idea is that he can do it. So therefore it's only called the ability. Kimvur Shem Baruch, as that Tzemach Tzedek does expound on this at length. Omnum tzimtzum zev shevichinis hayachilis eini maspekadayin shiyal yod vichinis ein itself amale as called amtzias. But the Rebbe explains that this tzimtzum is not within this level of the yachilis, of the ability. It's not enough that it should already have the oirin sof that is now filling the place, that has to get the real tzimtzum, that has to make the creation of the world. The everlasting light of Maamar is called a Metzias that fills up all existence for the Hayamokim Lamidus Eilamus, and therefore there's no space for the worlds to be viyuv. So this concept we can understand according to what the Middle Rebbe, Rabbi Dov Ber, the son of the Alter Rebbe, explains in his work Shara Yichud, the gate of the unity of God. Shetzorich lize idea beproteis seidei shlashlos v'gam beprotei inyan hatzimtzum. We have to know in detail, with the details of exactly how the chain of creation worked, and we also have to know the details of how the tzimtzum works, how these concentrations and constrictions. Therefore, the Mittler Rebbe continues to explain shegam lifnei tzimtzum harishin yesh gimel b'chinas u'madreges. That before the great first tzimtzum, that was the impetus of creation, the way we know it. And by the way, in that creation, that's where we first starts with the world of Atzilus, which is God in terms of how we can see it. In other words, at that level, we're not even splitting hairs here, but we're talking about vast, great levels of godliness. So at that level, he says there are three general aspects and levels. And like we explained, that God he created the world because he wanted to be kind, and this idea of kindness, the idea of giving and making and purveying. So regarding this idea, that's the reason for the whole creation and the first tzimtzum. There are these three levels before the tzimtzum. So one of the concepts that we speak about in creation is that God estimated his potential before creation, sort of like somebody would plan when they're going to make something and do something, and he saw in that, whatever, we're not talking about measuring it in time, we're just saying in what it would be, how he would make the world. So he estimated in the potential that which is actually in creation. Now, this estimation is again before all these levels of light, which is a level of tzimtzum already, because it's already processing. So this is then higher than this light that fills up all space, because like we said earlier, that's in relation to us, creation. And even this essential need and want that God had to create, even in relation to that, and it's not even the kindness yet, it's just that he wants it. He wants the idea of the kindness, the chayfetz. When you want something, it's the innermost of what your will really is. You want this. This is what you're lusting. That's the pleasure. That's we have discussed in the past. What Chassidic explains, the relationship between will and pleasure. But for this thing that you want to have something, there also has to be a tzimtzum, because you're wanting something. Again, it's a process. Any idea of light and revelation had to have a tzimtzum that preceded it to begin the process of what it's going to be. That from this ability and capability, there should be light. It should happen. Every light in revelation, every creation is lower than the ability to make it. Just like in the soul. A person could dream and do so much, and then whatever happens happens, but it's much less than the depth of what the person is. So, therefore, the ability within the soul is higher than all the revelations within the soul. Then the actual way the soul is able to express itself is whatever it is. Well, so this we could also understand with the idea of wanting kindness. That's already a revelation. This idea of capability and ability is higher and much more refined and pristine than the revelation, and that's why it's explained as such, because it focuses on the element of the essence of God, the way He is in His essence, and not so much on what He creates later. How is the world within the essence of God? There it's yicholos at that level. And from that level, there's God in His essence and His pristine state, and then He wants to have this other thing. So now He's already processing. So in order for this to happen, again, for this there has to be a tzimtzum. There has to be a change within the essence of light, because now something else is coming along. In this idea, the Rebbe explains that there are 3 levels. The lowest level of this is when he already measured out and estimated the Shira. He estimated how it is potentially everything that he created, actually so. And then once this, let's just use the word for lack of another term, blueprint, in other words, this idea he had, then there was the energy that he was going to use to make this, and that was not something which is palatable to the world at all. Nothing can handle that. But that's first where that is there, and then he had to now make the big tzimtzum in order to create. So then there was there's 3 tzimtzum, the idea of that he has this ability, that there's going to be something, that he wants something, that there's going to be a creation, that he's going to measure out what he's going to create, and then he has to make the tzimtzum just to have the material to make the great tzimtzum. Therefore, the infinite light then comes at that spot, which fills all existence. Hey. The 5th chapter of this Maamar. To explain what is this idea of this contraction, and this idea that the infinite light keeps on going higher and higher to no end. Maybe he brings in the Maamar before this tzimtzum, the infinite light was in a revealed sense. But remember, we said it was revealed, but there was no one to get this revelation. The Chaim explains that before the Ne'etzolim, these is the you can't call them creatures, because those are the creations already. Those are the nibroim. There's no the elements of the world of Atzilus are the Ne'etzolim, and before they were Netzel, that's the verb to make these elements. So these are, of course, in relation to us, just totally godly. So the Chaim explains that before that part was done, The supernal light was in the most pristine sense, and it was filling all of the existence. That's all there was. So there it's considered a revelation, but it's a revelation just within itself. And the Yahrtzeit Chaim brings in another concept that we talk about in terms of God, that the ultimate of the infiniteness of God, that it includes what's called the light that has no limitation and the potential to limit things. So there's Bligvul, that means without limit, and the Koyach HaGvul, the power to make finite. So it's the infinite and the finite together. Just that before the Tzimtzum happens, at that level, this revelation of the infinite light is without anything finite whatsoever. It's without any boundary, any limitation. Therefore, the finite part is just totally hidden. It's just because everything is possible. Therefore, the possibility to create is there, but it wasn't in existence, so to speak. It was just there in potential to create. But whereas the infiniteness is what God was and what God is at that level. And therefore there was no space for worlds, because all there is at that level is the infiniteness of God. So in order to create, so after all these tzimtzumim, these contractions, there's the supernal, pristine light. That's the light which has no end, which has no limitation, without limitation. And that is filling any existence. That's all there is. And therefore it had to be the first tzimtzum to create the world. This light can now be spread forth into the creation, be measured out, and here that we'll talk about it a little bit here, into the creation in terms of how much energy and light every world can handle and what it creates. At this point, the Rebbe says it's an element of a great leap, a total leap, much more than all of the subsequent tzimtzumim. In other words, this is the great change from being infinite to going to finite. So it's the greatest constriction, the greatest point, that now there's a change from the way God is in himself and the way he allows for worlds to exist. And therefore it's called that he removes, or he pushes himself aside, so to speak. And not just a plain tzimtzum. One of the talks that ever called it a mafil, it's a great, unbelievable type of a tzimtzum. So it's not just a plain tzimtzum. Here he has to push himself aside to be able to allow for this. And the Kabbalists talk about this also. He had to move over this great light to a side, so to speak. And in more detail, the Rebbe says this tzimtzum has two effects. Number one, he has to move aside that light that's filling everything, that's not allowing anything else to be there. That has to be moved aside. This is how we say, and we mentioned this earlier, this idea, if we look at it as in a circle, so then the tzimtzum is affected within the circle, because godliness was filling the whole circle, and now it's pushed aside to allow something else. Kivur mokamacher. The Rebbe speaks about that. That's what the Kabbalists talk about. Then afterwards, there is the way the line is drawn down. You want to pass me this for a moment? Thank you. So the way the line is brought is drawn down. We usually don't do this, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it. But this is the crib notes for the Maamar. This is actually a booklet that has the references which the Rebbe refers to. So here, I don't know if you could see it, but you see the way the Kabbalist illustrates it. here with a dot within the circle. But then here we're talking about once it's pushed aside, now there could be energy coming down. This is called the line. Now you see, it's illustrated. Think about these concepts. But the Kabbalists also tried to bring it down to something that you could conceptually. So there's what's called the kav. The kav is if there's going to be a drop of this light, and it's not like a laser light, because in a laser light everything is equal, all, if I understand correctly, all the light along the whole way. Here the light dissipates, but it also is focused, hyper-focused on a certain spot, and it could get as much light as it could, and it sort of breaks down. So here, let's see how the Rebbe speaks about it. So this line of light, so to speak, here at this point it's called the short line. Even though from this spot the whole chain of creation is created, so it keeps getting drawn further and further, but at this spot it's just a little piece. It's called the short line of energy that was already constricted, that's going to be used now for creation. Therefore it's still called this short line, especially since it was part of the great light which is even getting pushed aside. So now it's the small piece that's going to be used, so to speak, for creation. And certainly it's so much short line in relation to the great light that even made the light that got constricted. For this, they have to have another tzimtzum. And then it keeps on getting constricted, and therefore for creation to happen level after level, each subsequent level has to have less and less light. It's more and more constricted, more and more concentrated. And as the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Rebbe Shalom Deber, explains in his continuum of discourses, the famous ones of 56, 72 and 56, 66. The first tzimtzum is the source of all the subsequent tzimtzumim. So these are already the tzimtzumim that we talk about already, when the light is already within the name of God and using His name and the various names, the four-lettered name and the name which is kindness, and then the name of Elohim, which is to temper the kindness that's with severity, etc. Tzimtzumim shalamatim is then the subsequent tzimtzumim. Till we get to the lowest Sphira of the Atzilus, which is called Malchus. It's the all-inclusive Sphira that includes all the previous attributes of godliness before it, and it's considered the female one, which will be able to accept all the previous and then imbue and give to the next level. So then the next three worlds of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, creation, formation, and action. Our world is the lowest level of the Asiya. Through the first tzimtzum, now there's a certain spot where it was the force is so strong that we're in the creation of something called Olam HaTikun, where there's organization. In Olam HaTohu, everything exploded because there was no synthesis, and everything was just energy, and it wasn't able to be sustainable, and it just explodes, so to speak. And that's really a level of everything. By the way, everything in our life has all of these aspects. And in other words, there's to rein in and hone something in. He said, take it out of the toyu of the disorganization of what it's about, and bring it into something which can work, even if we have big things. So at this level, the Rebbe says the first tzimtzum had such a burst of light, so to speak. He mentioned it already earlier, that this also has what's called Shviras HaKelim, the vessel's breaking, and then it had to sort of reconstitute. And then it says from what fell off and broke off over there, certain things came down to the world, and there's in certain sparks and certain elements. This is where the forces of klippa, of the opposite of holiness, feed off of that energy, and therefore they're able to be strong in this world, in the lowest realm. Omnomini, not Tzimtzum, the Rebbe mentioned this only very briefly here, but this is discussed elsewhere at length, and you'll see in Tanya chapter 6 and chapter 24. Omnomini, not Tzimtzum, v'hahelem, einu ini shel chisaron. Now, this whole idea that Rebbe says, wow, we just spoke about such profound ideas, which we just touched upon at the tip of the point of the tip, and this ideas, and now the Rebbe says, these things are awesome, but nevertheless, this whole idea is not something which means it's lacking or it's a terrible thing. So the idea of the tzimtzum, the concealment, is not a chisorn. It's not a disadvantage. But through it, specifically, we're able to get the essence of God. Essence of God travels through all of this to the lowest realm. Like the fifth Rebbe, the Rebbe Shmuel, the Rebbe Marash, explains in his Discourse, who is like you, God. Everything on earth is not just it's not an optical illusion. It's not something which is heaven forbid, something which is just to fool us. It's a true existence. How do we know? Torah says so. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. It's a real heaven and a real earth. Now, we're talking about tzimtzum, so you think, okay, you don't get the real thing, you're getting something which is an illusion. But the truth is that everything that exists is a true existence, because it's God, who is like you amongst God, our God. There's nothing besides God. Godliness is in everything of creation. The Rebbe Marash explains in that Maamar, also in this world, in this low world that was created with so many contractions, so many tzimtzumim, we find nimtza tzmusim husis barach mamish. In this physical, carnal, material world, we have the actual essence and makeup of God, may be blessed. Actually so. Like he explains, the Alter Rebbe explains in Torah's Light, in the discourse called Pasuk Eliyahu, expounding on the Zohar, quoting Elijah, Shehamor who be his gallows, the luminary is revealed. How do we see that? Even a baby knows there's a God. Motzui, he exists and he's real. It's the idea that people say thank God, and the name of heaven is in everybody's mouth and everybody's whatever we speak and all the time. Like it's explained more at length in the discourses of the fifth Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, Rebbe Shalom Ber, and the discourses of the Rebbe's Rebbe and father-in-law, the previous Rebbe. The revelation of the essence of God is in this lowest world. This is what the Alter Rebbe explained in the dictum of the sages when they expound on the verse that says, who is like the Lord our God in any time that we call to Him, in all that we call to Him. And we say we call to Him, so the Chazal say, Elov v'lo limideisav, we call to Him directly, not to His attributes, not to His powers, not to anything, but to God is in His essence. We're talking to God's essence and His makeup, whatever God is in His pristine self. And the intent of the smallest of the children and the people, even ignoramus or uneducated and unlettered, whoever it may be, when they pray, is to the essence and the makeup of God. May He be blessed. And like the sages said, when I pray to God like the baby is praying. In other words, not with how much I understand, but to the essence of God. The baby knows God is here. That's what God is. The baby is praying to the essence of God, not to any big expounded explanations. A love to him and not to his attributes. So Ba'if and the B'chol Koreinu we love in like a way that in any way we call to him. Like we learned in Tanya Shini, that when we call to God, it's like a kid calling out to their father. Like when you're in trouble and you're saying, Dad, the real thing, the essence. But yes, it'll no more than that. Like a person who calls to their friend when you need something. V'alpi zayin, v'alpi kol anal yuvan techen in masinu v'rasinu v'dara dikv the Mashiach. And now the Rebbe says, let's bring it home. From all of this, we understand that it's our task and our job in this generation, in the generation of the heels of Mashiach. Shadav can be seen of his man because we're in a time that the darkness covers the earth. But tachlis at tzimtzum, and here that's the ultimate tzimtzum. We don't see God. We have to study a lot to understand any of this. There in that level, in this time, we bring the essence of the Shechina down to earth, like we spoke about in the first part of the Maamar. Not just the plain Shechina, the main part of the Shechina. What is that? This resting of God. The essence and the makeup of God. Like we spoke about in terms of prayer, that we pray directly to God, not to his attributes, meaning the essence. Like the prayer of the baby, which is to the essence of God, of the small child. Certainly through the service, our serving God and working and doing what God wants. And then a task, something which we even bring others to do a task. Like it says when charity, we bring others to give, when we have to collect money and say, yeah, everyone has to give. Everyone's obligated to give. So and that's the idea of subduing. We don't want to, but we do what we're supposed to. Like it's explained in several discourses, Chassidic discourses. And work, toil also doesn't only mean work, but the idea of working over a hide, tanning hides, it changes from being a very rough thing to something which is soft and usable. And that's the idea of avoida, really reworking something. From this we come through the revelation of the Shechina on this realm, with the true full redemption, the ultimate redemption. Through our righteous Mashiach, speedily in our days. God willing, we'll be able to do the subsequent Maamorim that the Rebbe said after this to explain some of these concepts, and it suggested that everyone does a little further homework on some of these tough concepts, and everyone should have a very inspiring Yahrtzeit, the day that we dedicate ourselves to the goals and realms that the Rebbe set out for us, and furthering the work of his Rebbe who passed away on this day. Like the Rebbe said, we have to focus on this day to do this work and ultimately bring the Shechina down to this world. Everyone should have a very good week and a good Shabbos, and all things good materially and spiritually.